Welcome back, everybody, from lunch and the last session. This is session number 8 on airport economics. It is sponsored by our good friend Ken Keats with Erectitube. If you guys need a hanger, call Ken. He'll take care of you. They do good work and they provide good hangers. And also Aviation Management Consulting Group. So if you need some consulting on airport financials, business operations, minimum standards, rules and regs, they are the firm to see for that. So two good firms to recognize for this particular session. With me today I have three distinguished gentlemen, two of them which were already introduced earlier, and I'll just briefly tell you a few things that you may not know. Has anybody heard of the movie Breaking Away? All right, cool. That's Mr. Cushing's favorite movie from the 70s. I had never heard of it, so I'll have to add that to my Netflix next week. Fairly on the edge. And then Jim also, something you may not have known, is Jim was borderline Olympic skier. Not close, but Jim was a skier for many years and still skis today pretty heavily, right? No? And Rod Probst, who you don't know, and some of you do know, but is the Deputy Director of Airports for the City of San Diego. He's been an airport manager in both California and in Arizona, so he's seen perspectives of two states. You'll sometimes hear Rod say Semper Fi because he's a Marine, and he also had responsibility for Camp Pendleton. And Rod's was elected to the board in 2016 for AAAE. So with that, we're going to jump right into the session. We're going to talk about airport economics. Many of you airports are already self-sustaining, so this should be a very easy topic. And Rod's going to give you some good pointers. And then we're going to go load some questions around the room and work with both Dave and Jim to address those in kind of an open forum in the middle of the session. So with that, I'll hand it over to Rod.
I'm stunned that there's so many of you still here, but I see a lot of my friends, so they came just so I wouldn't be embarrassed. Thanks, Keats. Mr. Batista. So let's talk about the Airport Enterprise Fund. I have 20 slides. Usually takes me 40 hours to do what we're going to do in the next 20 minutes. But I could do it faster, but we got Joe with us, so we got to slow way down. So, is your Airport Enterprise Fund healthy? How would you find out, and why should you care? Well, we're going to talk about that, and then we'll walk through it. We all are pretty good at budgeting, where you take your revenue stream, and then you tailor your expenditures to be within it. We all do that pretty well. It's called managerial accounting. It's not constrained by generally accepted accounting principles, and it's kind of whatever you want it to be. It's a tool that you use to plan for the year. In my prior life, when I flew for the Marines, it was sort of like the battle plan. You know, it was a great plan, and after the first minute that you crossed the line of departure, the plan really didn't mean a thing. So the budget is like that. It's just a plan, and you need to monitor it. It's not ever going to tell you, is your airport fund healthy or not? All it is a plan about how much revenue you expect and how much you're going to spend out of the revenue stream. So why should you care, and how would you take care of questions? Well, one of the reasons is the grant assurances demand it, and my colleagues up here, my learned colleagues, if you're not paying attention to the grant assurances, they have a colleague there at the FAA, a guy named Tony Garcia. Anybody had a letter from Tony? Joe and I have. It's not that much fun. Trust me, I didn't get a nice letter. So the grant assurances demand it. Eventually, there's always somebody on your board of supervisors or the city council that's going to say, hey, Rod, how healthy is the airport fund? How liquid is it? And you go, I don't know. I didn't think I could pour it. You know, it doesn't look like beer to me. What's the debt load, and how does that compare to the equity, which in the public sector we call net assets? Are you profitable? Did you make money or lose money? Because we're really all running publicly owned businesses. And your goal is to not lose money. Your goal is to make a profit and have a reserve. So we don't say profit because our tenants get cranky, but we want to increase our net assets. And you want to be able to describe the flow of funds through the enterprise. That's the cash flow. And we'll talk about that, but essentially what you start the year with, what kind of money did you generate from financing, operating, and investing, and what did you end up with? Were you net cash flow positive or negative? Somebody will eventually ask you that. That's really the wrong time to call me when you're in front of the dais and council member Schmuckatella says, well, Rod, tell me about the fund. That's also the wrong time to enroll at SIU in their airport physical aspects class. So, quickly we're going to just talk about the grant assurances. These are the ones I believe that you have to pay attention to when it comes to the enterprise fund and accounting for it. The general requirements talks about the Single Audit Act. 3, do you have enough money when I go to Mr. Cushing and say, hey, we want to do this $12 million project, do I have enough local match money? And how can I prove that to him? Do I have an accounting system that's in accordance with the Single Audit Act of 1984 as modified in 1996? And everybody gets audited, whether you like it or not. Can you tell them unequivocally that all of the airport revenues you generate stay at the airport? That the city manager isn't taking them downtown to fund fire and police, which of course would never happen unless you're a big airport in Los Angeles, which will remain unnamed. Reports and inspections. Secretary can demand that you provide annual or special financial reports or operational reports. Again, you don't want to get a letter from the Secretary of the Department of Transportation. Single Audit Act. This is a pamphlet that you can find online, was put out in 2005, and it essentially says in 2005, 1/6 of the federal budget, approximately $400 billion, was given to cities, counties, and states as grant money. And the way that the federal government ensures you're not spending that money on golfing at Pebble Beach is through audits of the airport fund. So, there is a book that the government finance officers published in 2012 by a guy named Kavanaugh that essentially says your organization should have a policy that talks about how you're going to externally report your financial activities. And those activities should comply with generally accepted accounting principles. It goes on to say that most of us put together our organization, a city, a county, or an airport authority, put together a comprehensive general financial report, commonly referred to as the CAFR. So in the city of San Diego, it's a huge document. San Diego is the 8th largest city in the country, the 2nd biggest city in the state, and it has more process than even the Marine Corps had. Independent audit is very important in the public sector because it proves to our constituents that we are in fact using their money appropriately, and it says that our financial statements are fair and reasonably conceived. Again, there's the data, the ISBN for that book if you're interested. So from the combined annual financial report, we're going to be able to determine liquidity, debt load, profitability, and how the cash flow is described. We're going to do this very quickly, and then I will sit down. Liquidity means that when I go to the bar tonight, I will have enough cash on hand to get a beer and not have to hit up Mr. Keats. But I will probably do that anyway, just because he's a good guy. Capital structure. Did you acquire assets with debt or with net assets called liquidity? Did you make money or lose money? I mean, it's pretty cut and dry. You made money or you didn't. Cash flow presents the flow of funds through the business. Again, what'd you start with, what you get from operating, investing, financing, and what you end up with. This is where the real money is. The balance sheet and the income statement are measurements of revenue or expenditures. The real money lives in cash flow. Current ratio. And there's a bunch more ratios that we would talk about. If you called me up and said, Rod, will you help me figure out my enterprise fund? We'd talk about a bunch of liquidity ratios. We're going to talk about one, which is the current ratio, where we look at current assets, which we expect to be turned into cash very shortly in the current period, and compare it to our current liabilities. So current assets, again, this was made up for Marines. Where's Wadley? He's not here. One of my former students, he knows this. So current assets divided by current liability says for every dollar of current debt we have so many dollars and cents of current assets to cover those current liabilities. You certainly would hope for a ratio of at least 1 to 1. Debt ratio compares our total liabilities to our total assets, says, hey, this is how much of our total assets, everything we own, that was financed by debt. So total liabilities divided by total assets. So debt to total or to net assets. Net assets, as I said, is your equity. If you were a private entity, it would be assets equal liabilities plus owner's equity. In the public sector, equity is net assets. So it's total assets divided by net asset, or total liabilities divided by net assets. And again, it just tells you how much of what you have you paid for out of owner's equity. Operating profit compares operating profit to operating revenues. Essentially, from what you do at your airport, did you make money or lose money? So operating profit divided by operating revenues. If this relationship is negative, it simply reinforces the fact that you lost money, which may or may not be a bad thing. Net profit margin compares your net profit to all of your operating revenue. Typically, this number is less than the operating profit margin, but not necessarily, because when we get grant money from the FAA, which we all love, there's nothing like free money, or 90 cents on the dollar free money. We love that. If you borrow money, if your airport is big enough to put out bond issues, you have to pay the interest back. This isn't a, oh, by the way, you have to do it if you want to. Every year, the bondholders expect to be paid their interest, unless it's a zero bond, and they expect it all at the end. The interest is paid out of the income that the airport generates. It's called times interest earned. You should have at least $5 of revenue income to pay $1 of interest debt. So, my favorite airport right now happens to be the city of San Diego's, and we're going to take a quick look at our combined annual financial report for 2016 as a case study. 2 years ago, my favorite airport was Sedona. Before that, it was Fullerton. And I actually even ran an airport in Oregon, which we won't talk about. No, we don't want to talk about Oregon. So, here is a picture of the front of the CAFR, the beautiful city, San Diego. On the right is the auditor's report. The auditor's only job is to express an opinion as to whether the financial statements are conventionally and fairly presented. And they say that, and that's what's outlined in yellow. They're not going to say that we audited everything. They're going to say we audited what was presented to us. So if your airport, like Missoula did years ago, kept a second set of books, they're not going to audit the second set. Not that there's anything wrong with that. You can ask the guy in the state prison in Montana. So there's essentially two types of funds that airports operate out of. Enterprise funds, which are truly an enterprise. They make money and they pay their bills out of that. If you have a special revenue fund, that means you can take money out of the general fund if you can convince the city manager to, like, lay off 5 cops and 10 firefighters. And, oh, by the way, the emergency response goes from 3 minutes to 7. So good luck with that. So enterprise funds charge for land. They charge user fees, and that's how they generate money. At Joe's airport, they charge for other stuff, but I don't think we want to talk about it. It's not legal. Yeah, I know. Wow. Just because Brown Field, I can almost throw a rock at the tower at Tijuana. So the 3 statements that you're going to get in your financial report is a balance sheet, an income statement, statement of cash flow. sometimes call them different things, but this is the balance sheet. What you're seeing is highlighted current assets, current liabilities, and total liabilities, then owner's equity or net assets. So, this 4.2 million bucks, this is real money. This is money I expect to get because Mr. Cushing was generous and gave me a grant. This is my money because I'm going to pay the contractors, all of the consulting engineers, and all of the workers, and I'm going to ask him to give me money in return for reimbursement. Why would we not do that as fast as possible? Why would we not draw down on money that's ours? I'm flabbergasted because I've been coming here for 20 years, and every year, if it's not him, it's somebody standing up saying, what are you guys, all stupid? We got free money, and you're not drawing it down. It's there. It's there. It's part of our current assets. So, do I get my 20 bucks later? Okay, just checking. Oh, current ratio. City of San Diego's Airport Enterprise Fund has $4.09 of current assets to pay a dollar's worth of current liabilities. So I don't need Ken Keats to buy me beer tonight. Well, that's not true. Debt ratio, 13.7%. That's not bad. You know, for a public entity, that's okay. 13.7% of our assets we acquired with debt. Debt to equity, or net assets, 15.9%. So we acquired our total assets 15.9% with our own owner's equity. This is the profit and loss statement, statement of consolidated operations, whatever you want to call it. So this is not quite as pretty as I'd like. We have operating revenue, total revenue, net revenue. So as you can see, we lost $156,000 in profit from operating. That's not good. It's a negative 3.32%, reinforces the fact that we lost money. So out of a $5 million typical budget, I can accept that. Net profit, we lost $2,000. So it's 0.043% loss. So why do we do that? Well, you can see we had capital contributions of grant funding, and that actually turned, that grant money turned an operating loss to an increase in net assets, which we like. Grant money is free money. It's painful to get it, but once you get the grant and your people accept it, it's free found money. Who doesn't like that? So cash flow, what do we start with? What do we get from operating, financing, and investing? What do we end up with? So we started out with about $17 million, $6.8 million in cash. That is real money. You can reach out and touch that cash, or things that we expect to turn into cash very quickly. We made just over 1 million from operating, and we lost 3.6 in financing. That was from having to pay the local match, which we hate to do. We wish the state would step up and pay more. Mr. Cathy, who's not even paying attention to me. And at the end of the year, we lost about $2.5 million in cash. Why did we lose cash? Well, we paid the local match. We got probably $6.5 million in new runway reconstruction, and we complied with an unfunded federal mandate of reconstructing our bathrooms to be barrier-free, ADA compliable. Because in San Diego, there's lawyers that go around and sue you if you're not ADA compliable. So it's a good thing the bathrooms are much nicer. If you come down to see us, you'll be very impressed with our bathrooms, which we spent $2 million on. So all of this CAFR stuff needs to be looked at over time. You need to look at it from a regression analysis and say, hey, what have you guys been doing in the last 7 years? Well, our total assets went up by $20 million in 7 years. That's real stuff that you can touch on the airfields or 5 of the 7 years we made a profit. 5 of the 7 years we were net cash flow positive. I can live with all that. I'm pretty happy with it because I'm not doing bathrooms as long as I'm still down there. All right, let's see this magic. This has probably happened at your airport. Oh. All right, Mr. Magic Man.
So we will get that schedule revised and sent right out to you, sir.
That sounds good. Listen, I should be back in the office on Tuesday. I'd like to see an updated P&L.
Very good, sir. Yeah. We're all over it.
Not a problem.
Take care.
That was close. Yeah, that was close.
I can still hear you. I think we're good. Yeah, that should do it. I think we're good.
FedEx.
That's it. That's where my guys are. I know that.
Let's hear it for Rob. Thanks, Rob. Before I open up for questions, I'll just go to Jim and Dave to maybe brief us on the FAA's perspective on, obviously, there's a fine line on where financial involvement is from the FAA side, but just curious if you guys have any input. Let's go to Jim first.
So from my perspective, coming from Alaska, the state of Alaska owns most of the airports, 200 and some, and the communities love their airports. I mean, it's their lifeline. 82% of the communities don't have road access. It's through the airport. So then I drive down the Alcan and I come pulling into sunny California and start working with the airports, and lo and behold, I hear about communities not liking their airport. I know. I had the same reaction. I was pretty surprised. And so, as I've kind of learned over time is that, if the airport is, not that there's anything wrong with this, but if the airport is pulling funds from the county and isn't fully self-sufficient, it seems like they get more attention. And people start questioning, are we really getting our money's worth out of the airport? So at least from my perspective, and I'm definitely not the pro on this subject like Dave and Rod are, but whatever we can do and what my eyes are opening to is, how can we, help you be successful in this area of, being self-sustainable? And because it seems like if you're not, people are starting to question, do we want to still be investing? That's my 2 cents worth.
Well, I think that what I like about financial awareness and sustainability is that it brings the question of serving your market, knowing your market, and making wise investments because you're looking at the bottom line. And it's not like we don't appreciate your dreams for your community, but it should be based in reality, and I think that helps you. So if you are getting a subsidy from your local community, and some of them it's very well deserved and understood and supported, and we don't really, not that there's anything wrong with that. There really isn't. I mean, we're more than happy to see local communities recognize the value of their airport and subsidize it. And they can subsidize it in any kind of way. It's not airport revenue if it comes from an outside source. So there's all sorts of things that a local community can do to support aviation in its community. We think that's wise. But it also shouldn't color your decision-making about what's wise for your airport from a profit loss and going concern kind of basis. And you'll hear that from me all the time, and I realize we're making you guys go in 2 different directions at once, and I totally get it. You're both a utility that's subsidizing an activity that might not otherwise exist, so that's not really a great business plan. But we're also expecting you to be financially prudent and self-sustaining and have accounting practices and all of those grant assurances, Rod, that I'm glad that you mentioned. So first of all, it does, from my point of view, it gets you centered on how to remain a going concern, which I think makes you make prudent decisions, about hangar development, about non-aeronautical uses, about preserving your land for future uses that you don't know what it's going to be. I mean, all of these things are peculiar decisions that we expect airports to make in a odd sort of economic world. So being as close to reality as you can be, I think is helpful. So and that's why we care, and then generally speaking, we want to make sure that the investments that we're making are going to be well taken care of, and that the user community is going to find a wholesome place to land that's got some services and some help and some creature comforts. Even those things are fine, but that it's a successful airport from a business perspective. So I think that's the number one thing. I mean, we can talk about other aspects that are more sophisticated, but from my point of view, we want to also make sure that you're got enough money to maintain the pavement and mow the grass and take care of wildlife and throw some safety issues around that we can't get to, or that really are more operational. So from that, though, that again, the local community and you can determine the public character of your airport with good planning.
Everything else, Jim?
I guess the only other thought would be, Rod talked about the grant assurances. We always kind of hear about people, oh yeah, we got these assurances. But if you look at them, most of them are there to help you be successful. Fair market value for non-aviation use. I mean, use Dave as the bad guy. If you're having problems with the county or somebody, say, hey, we're just trying to meet FAA's requirements. We have broad shoulders, and it's part of you being successful.
And a question for you, Rod. From being in 3 states apparently, as airport manager, what is some advice you have on the general aviation side of developing, building, and owning and operating your own hangars versus soliciting out an RFQ or an RFP to a master leasehold developer and collecting a ground lease fee in lieu of maintaining, operating, and holding those? What have you noticed over those years?
Well, I've been blessed to, in the last 20 years, all but one of my airports was totally self-sufficient. That's a function of location. When I had a real estate license, the 3 most important things in real estate are location, location, location. In Fullerton at Orange County, I could charge $600 for a very nice new erected tube T-hanger, $600. But that's Orange County. If you go to Brawley, not so. Sedona, I was telling somebody at lunch, there's an entrepreneurial component of running the Sedona airport in that we were the FBO. So I set the fuel prices. And I very quickly realized that whatever was being charged at Scottsdale and Vail and Jackson Hole, I'd average that out, knock 50 cents off, and that's what I would charge. So I was picking up 150% profit. I'd buy it for $3 a gallon and sell it for $7.50. So that's what we used to balance the airport fund. So at Montgomery Gibbs Executive Airport, the first 20 acres on the south side of the airport is in commercial retail use, which has been released as non-aeronautical. That's free money. If you have an industrial park like they do at Gillespie Field, that's free money. When you build hangars, then you got to maintain hangars, and then you got to listen to everybody that's cranky when you raise the rent. And the cables are stretched out on this, or the motor doesn't work. So sometimes it's better just to collect the rent for dirt. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, great one. Another just a question of hands. How many folks in the room here are in GA airport or managing a GA airport? And how many of you are at occupancy with your hangars currently, where you have a waiting list? So how many times have you been told that you're not charging currently enough? Probably many of you had. Yeah. So I guess a question back to you, Rod, is if you're at occupancy, you have a 15 to 20 person waiting list, should you be reviewing your rental rates and adjusting those over the next 5 years as the economy picks up, or judging by the economy? You can only judge so much of what things are going to go in the aviation side.
Well, I remember years ago, our good friend John Pfeiffer used to say, if you've seen one airport, you've seen one airport. So you need to know your airport. At Montgomery Gibbs, we rent dirt to people that have put port-to-port hangars on, and these are now real property improvements. And they're almost a rounding error in my budget. They're never going to balance my budget. So as a almost quasi-public utility, they're not going to make me self-sufficient. So is it worth the fight to raise their rent by 300% and bring them up to what they should have had for CPI increases over the last 15 years? No. My goal is to make the net assets increase by other revenue streams that I don't lose so much hide in the fight over.
All right, I'll open it up for questions. I don't know, Eric, if we have a microphone roaming around. But any questions? Mr. Strickland.
I've never had that conversation.
You know, I actually have sort of advised that accounting for, what are the examples in which it kind of makes sense to me accounting for things separately? It's more like a cost accounting or a cost analysis. I know, with proprietary exclusives, and when I used to deal with a lot of private airports, and the family business would be on the airport, and when it comes time to die and leave this to your heirs, they don't know what the value of the family business is that's separate from the airport business. So sometimes it's good. It's really just cost center accounting. It's not really a separate set of books, but that it's a good idea to understand what your airfield costs are, obviously, and I think that it gets to, again, the question of what your hangar market should be like, if you know where those costs are going and where the revenues are coming from. So you can get a better idea, make smarter decisions about unbundling this prospect. And we generally think that the flowage fee should be about the airfield. If you have landing fees or something, that should be about the airfield, and that providing those common elements first is the number one responsibility, safety and operations. And then, revenues, you talk about raising rents on aeronautical users. You're certainly not required to walk by found money. I mean, willingness to pay, you can accept the higher bidder. I mean, we've had waiting list complaints in compliance, and it's you have a waiting list, and the rules of the waiting list should be fair or transparent, but the FAA doesn't regulate your waiting list. So if somebody comes along with a different proposal and makes a different deal, then I don't know why you can't rent a ground for them to build a hangar. They're going to be paying more. So there's all those sorts of questions, and having a good set of books and a good idea of your cost centers helps you make those decisions.
Yes, Joe?
The City of San Diego has a council policy that we RFP out parcels. We're in the process of doing that. We're couching one in terms of 15 years, and we want you to paint these old hangars and fix the pavement. If you came back and said, well, we want it for 15 years and we're going to scrape it and build you a whole set of new hangars, we'd do that. You can't recover, you can't amortize your cost in 15 years. We have another parcel that's, God forbid, a 10-year holdover on a 40-year lease, which isn't the worst holdover I had, by the way. I had a 28-year holdover tenant. So we're going to RFP that out for best and highest use, and whoever gives us the best deal and is most qualified, that's who we'll lease it to, and we will predicate the term based on the capital investment. Well, we listened to Bob Trimborn this morning, and it's not single-engine, four-seat airplanes on the uptick. It's the guy that can afford the Global Express. Those guys are on the uptick. We love them.
So this is part of my transition since coming here, and this is my personal opinion. Does not represent FAA's opinion in any way. So if I had an FAA hat on, I'd take it off. But and Dave will probably kick me under the table. But when I first got here, there was an airport that came to me about, transferring this piece of property, right in line with the existing apron and stuff, making that a non-aviation use because they had a potential market for it. And I said, there's just no way. There's no way we can consider that because, who knows, in 20 or 30 years, that could be needed for aviation development. And then a year has gone by, and then I've started, seeing things in the news and understanding that a lot of airports are having challenges. And I find my personal opinion kind of changing that, maybe, we talk about airports being self-sustainable. Maybe we, FAA, me, Jim Lohman, need to look at things a little bit differently in that, maybe that revenue generation, giving up that piece of property, and if it's going to allow that airport to be financially viable for years and years to come, maybe that's a highest and best use for that piece of property. And but I mean, that's not any kind of conversations we've had, internally. But my eyes are kind of, or I'm looking at things differently now than I did a year ago.
Yeah, and just to jump in on that, Joe, I would agree that sponsors are going to have to get smarter in how they can generate revenue because the general aviation decline for smaller aircraft is happening, and it's in front of all of us in the future. And having the regulators be more flexible and be understanding and create ways to get non-aeronautical purposes approved through the ALP process and make sure that everybody's on board for good uses of the airport is where things are going to have to go. And then in terms of the development side on airports, general aviation, small hangars and ways to lease out larger parcels, I think are going to be more of a natural part of the business. I also think triple Ps will start happening more. You'll start to see partnerships with private investment with leased land and longer-term leases. Flexibility with having longer-term leases is another thing that some of the policymakers, not at the FAA side, but at the county levels or at the local levels will have to become more flexible, for sure.
Well, Corey, that there's a couple of contradictions I think I want to point out, and that is a longer-term lease does not give you more flexibility. It gives you less flexibility in terms of changing the dynamic of your airport, and that changing lease expirations are the opportunity for both parties to adjust their business plans and adopt new ideas. Okay, that goes both ways. So, and I believe, and I've found, in fact, in the past, that could include a non-aeronautical use if such use is a better idea. But the story has to be pretty good, and data, history help that story. But if you're taking primo aeronautical property and turning it into non-aeronautical property with improvements that make it unlikely to be retrieved, that's going to be a hard push, but it's not an automatic no from my point of view. But what I want to know is, okay, when you take that aeronautical property out of aeronautical use, is your airfield otherwise right-sized and right-planned for the new use, the new role, the new character? And secondly, that the money that you're going to make from this is used to increase the utility or make that transformation. I can tell you that we have plenty of airports that are wrong-sized, that are too big, or are pursuing markets that are too thin because of the capital demands of their infrastructure. So, I mean, sometimes culturally it's hard to push that idea, but I'm listening. I know Jim's listening. But it has to be a good story, and that's why you want to plan, going back to yesterday's presentation, and that it's not just you plan it, apologies to Mr. Kirsch, it's not that you plan it, it's done, here's your property, and sign off on it, do whatever you want. So, because it's an ongoing balance. You can't respond to the changing market if you put yourself in cement. So, 20-year leases with 2 10-year extensions or something like that I don't think is too onerous. If you get up into the 50-year range, you're going to talk to us anyway. So, it kind of goes both ways, a lot. So,
yeah, I would agree, Dave. The challenge is when you get the 50-year obviously is not where long-term leases should go, but the 20-year has to be considered for people to have private equity money that makes sense on leased land. And that's what we're hearing in the industry, obviously, from the developer side.
Yeah, and that's even a grant assurance. It's an obscure one, but you know you can't turn down long-term leases.
All right. We got Ken.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in. Rod was certainly correct in saying that sometimes it's better just to lease the dirt, but on the other hand, I want to share a quick story. This last year at Williams, Arizona, which is a tiny little town in northern Arizona, we went ahead and built a 10-bay T-hanger up there, and there were 6 based aircraft on the field. And they filled the hangar up inside of 8 or 9 months through a ADOT loan, which is not available now. But the reason for the story is to tell you that don't sell yourself short of knowing whether or not you got a market or not. I would not personally have taken that challenge, but the city had a forward-thinking idea that they wanted to promote the airport, and they're off and running now, and they're drawing airplanes in from all over. So you never know. The market is changing. It's coming back in terms of hangars, and it has been a lull, but certainly I'm seeing a lot of uptick right now. Just so, if just that thought.
Good. Sure.
And, you know, I think that just to link the presentations together even more, I think that's why the non-aeronautical uses of hangars is really sort of a key, because you really can kill the market for your hangars, and then no one wants to come in and build the hangars that your market really needs because there's an oversupply of ridiculous storage. I don't know, do you have experience with that?
Go ahead.
The key to me is that the airport manager or director has to know the market. And there's things that I didn't know when I built hangars in Fullerton that Ken did know. And then the economy fell out, and I was calling the FAA saying, I got a guy that wants to store, you know, left-handed widgets in there, and we're going to charge him, you know, fair market rental value. And this was before there was really any policy, and you know, I got the la 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 la, don't tell me that. And that's what we did. I would have done anything in there just to make the bottom line, and the new hangar policy addresses that, and it's good. But you got to know the market. You've got to talk to the vendors who are going to build hangars, because I can tell you unequivocally, a hangar waiting list with 300 people on it that didn't put anything more than $10 down to get on the list is worthless.
We'll go to the last question with Jim.
Yeah, Rod, I heard you mention my name earlier. 15 years ago, when I took your class, I passed, by the way, magically.
It's a hard class.
C-minus.
It's a very hard class. When you were mentioning liquid assets, I thought you were talking about beer. But but I did get good at finding a good use for expiring entitlement funds.
All right. Well, once again, let's hear it for our presenters. And we're going to contribute on behalf of you guys for Wounded Warrior, and I'd also like to thank Erectitube and Aviation Management Consulting Group for this session. And we'll have a break in the break room, and then we're back here, and I think in 15. Thank you.